Greetings and welcome to Get the Tea with Gita. On our show, as of late, we've worked on trying to deal with the political climate and trying to make people understand what is going on and how things operate behind the scenes. Today, we have the luxury of having Rina Shah be able to talk to us about how she got into this process and explain the processes as to, in the primaries, how people end up running for office and being selected for a certain position to represent a party. So we welcome you for joining us here today. And Rina, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here with you.
Our absolute pleasure. If you wouldn't mind, if you could just have an introduction of yourself, tell us basically where you are in your life at this point, and then how you got into the space of politics.
Sure. Well, number one job for me right now is mom. I've been a bit of a virtual school teacher, preschool teacher, I might add, over the past year. My daughters are 2 and 5, and my older daughter will be starting kindergarten in Fairfax County come this fall. We were very fortunate to find out she was able to get into a magnet school, and very excited for the process of having a child in the educational system here in Northern Virginia. I come from Southern West Virginia, about 5-hour drive from my home in Reston out to Beckley, which is my hometown. I went to West Virginia University for undergrad, and then I pushed out here to Washington, D.C. to live the American dream way back.
So let me talk a little bit about West Virginia, and I'm not going to shed any light on my family members, but I can just tell you this. Those who went to West Virginia didn't finish in West Virginia because they had a different focus when they went to West Virginia. So I'm glad that you actually graduated. That in of itself is a huge achievement.
Oh my, those were some good times I had out there in Morgantown, I tell you.
We're not going to ask for any disclosures because I don't know what the statute of limitations would be, but we're just going to go forward and let you just speak from there. So now at some point you ended up living in DC.
I did. I lived in DC. I remember the month I moved in, January 2006, and it was quite a ride. I lived in almost every quadrant of the city and was fortunate enough to even become a homeowner there. I started my small business there, a consulting agency, and this is the reality of living in DC, is that you don't feel like you have much of a voice. So sometime in the era that I was a congressional staffer, I was a senior aide to 2 Republican members of the House of Representatives. I was up there on Capitol Hill in their personal offices for approximately 4 years. And during that time, in my free time, whatever little free time there was, that a congressional staffer has, which is almost none. But I thought it was a good idea to get involved in my local Republican Party. So I was very active in the DC Republican Party and rose up the ranks from being just a volunteer and somebody who showed up to being on the executive committee, to being appointed by the chairperson to the policy platform committee, and was extremely active there, to the point where 2016, in 2012, I had attended the Tampa Republican National Convention. And then in 2016, I thought, why not run to be a delegate, one of those people on the floor, instead of sitting in the rafters. So for 2016, I decided I was going to run, and I did. And I was elected to be a delegate to the Republican National Convention in 2016, in early spring of 2016. And this is relevant because this was actually a very pivotal experience in my life. I ran, and I was one of 160 names on the ballot for only 32 full-fledged spots. Only 32 spots, of which only 16 were full-fledged. And so I lent my name to a slate of delegates, people who wanted to run and support Senator Marco Rubio for the presidency. I did that. I turned out to be the number 2 vote getter out of all 160 people. And I carried a sign that day. I was at the convention. I stood there near the doors. Big old sign. It said, daughter of immigrants, small business owner, all these things I thought were really great about myself, millennial, mother, just trying to get people to vote for me. And I handed out lollipops. I said, don't be a dum-dum, have one. Vote for me.
That was
and
a
so
kicker.
I got to see that. Yeah. It was really an incredible moment in which I had spent at that point some 5 years helping out long shot Quixote candidates around the country who wanted to run for Congress as Republicans. I moved around from Manchester, New Hampshire to Greenville, South Carolina. I did all these great things, and I had the great privilege and honor of being a field operative as a Republican consultant. I would go in and I would help candidates not only set up their farm teams, but I would write speeches for them and talking points. And so when I ran to be a delegate, I thought, this is great. This is just something that's going to be a lot of fun this summer. Well, little did I know that shortly after I was elected, I'd be doing some media, and I became the first ever delegate in the country to criticize Donald Trump when he was just the presumptive nominee. And that changed my entire life 5 years ago this spring. And that was the definitive moment was really when I was othered by the party. I was told I was a Republican in name only, that I had to fall in line, and that I should go back to where I came from. And I thought, funny, it's next door, West Virginia. But
Right.
this is the treatment many of us had to endure for not supporting now the former 45th president.
Now, when you were growing up, were your parents aligned with any particular party themselves?
No, they were not. They were actually very purple, I'd call it. West Virginia was quite purple in the era that I was growing up there. And my father, although he was a general surgeon, he'd immigrated to the US from India from Uganda by way of India in 1970. And he landed up in the foothills, I say, of Appalachia and loved it and built this wonderful life there. My mom joined him in 1980 and had a great time growing up there because it was very suburban. It felt like just what a child in Northern Virginia goes through. I went to karate lessons, I went to piano lessons. I had all those great opportunities, and it's because economically that area was really thriving back in the 80s and 90s. And well, we know what happened towards the end of the 90s is that the mines started to close and people were left without work. And so my parents, though, in raising me there, always encouraged me to be civically involved, really encouraged me to just be a part of the civic process more than anything. We listened to NPR when I was waking up every morning. My dad would take me to events. He was a treasurer for a libertarian gubernatorial candidate in West Virginia in the 90s who was a friend of his. And so we were acquainted with Senator Byrd. We were supporters of now Senator Capito. Every governor had met my folks, and it was because they loved to meet these movers and shakers because they knew it was important. They weren't enthralled so much by the celebrity of it. They thought it was important to be connected. So if you had an opportunity to meet somebody who was an elected leader, whether at the state or federal level, they really conveyed to me how important that was and would take me with them. And so, it was just a great experience, but they never once said, go register as a Republican at age 18. I did that on my own, on my own volition. And I did it with now Senator Manchin standing in my high school cafeteria when I was 18.
Isn't it funny how life kind of comes full circle with certain things? So that's pretty
Indeed.
impressive on that. So yeah. So now when you said you hit 18, so by the time you were 18, you've now lived in West Virginia for 18 years, your whole life.
Indeed.
Did you feel like your community as a whole was receptive of you and your family and inclusive?
Well, I had a very experience. I always like to be candid about it. My father was a general surgeon. My mother was a lawyer by training. My dad came over to the US with $80 in his pocket. We'd lost everything as a family in Uganda due to the dictator Idi Amin, which is a lot of why I spoke out against Donald Trump. I always say I can spot a dictator or wannabe dictator a mile away. And therefore, that experience of, well, let me be honest. Growing up in West Virginia, having that privilege and having the socioeconomic status that my father was able to attain in time, that really shielded me from a lot of the criticisms and the othering and treatment, poor treatment that was, racially driven and xenophobic in nature that many of my peers did endure in other parts of the state. On the whole, West Virginians are good, innocent, God-fearing people. But we all know that in any part of the country, anybody can be met with these very same horrible things that represent the underbelly of society. And so I was shielded from a lot of that. And I will say it's something I try to acknowledge because it's important to say that my experience wasn't what that of my cousins in the central part of New Jersey was when they immigrated, when they were only in fourth grade. Being somebody who could say I was born and raised in West Virginia and was just sort of felt like I was like every other maybe blonde hair, white skinned gal when I'm really just under 5'2" and brown and got really dark hair. It's the kind of thing that I'm thinking about it now more so now that I'm a mother, that how do we work on that? How do we get these rural communities where people think are bastions of hate, in this era, especially? How do we get people to see that some of these folks have just never been exposed?
So now, when you ended up becoming more politically involved, and you said at some point um, you felt like you were othered. What was that transition like? Was that immediate? Was it, slower in this transition? Like, how did you at some point you said that had the aha moment? Like, I've been doing the work, I've been invested, and now all of a sudden the front door shouldn't be mine.
Right. It was uniquely different, my experience in speaking out against the now former president when he was not even the nominee. It was presumed he would be the nominee at the point at which I did it, but I did it on a national Fox News interview. I was already coming into my own as a political commentator, albeit a very junior one. I've been appearing on PBS, an all-women's roundtable called To the Contrary. At that point, I've been appearing on that show for 3 years. I had also, unfortunately, now I must sort of pay for this, but I like to be open about it. I did start my political commentary career at One America News Network, which is now, we know, very right wing, a very scary place, a place that does not deal in facts. When they started the network, they were not even part of the Verizon lineup, and I was with them in that transition to cable TV. And so I had the latitude to really speak my mind there. But what I started to realize is that there were people involved in the behind the scenes that wanted me to say a certain thing, that would book me on air when I would be more critical of President Obama, and I would really say a certain thing. That's what they liked. And so, of course, nobody was trying to tell me exactly what to say. But I saw that trend and I felt it was dangerous. But when I was on Fox News National, I was surrogate for the Republican National Committee on Asian American media. Funny enough, even though I'm not somebody that really presents with the hyphen. I always say I'm just American. But look, that's a whole nother conversation. I think for me, when I was on Fox News National and spoke out against the presumptive nominee Trump and saw what that backlash was, it was immediate. I turned my phone on and I had to turn it off. The right wing trolls had found me. Breitbart News found me, published false information. What followed in the weeks after was that my own party, the DC GOP, decided to cross my name off a list of democratically elected delegates to the convention. I had to fight to have my seat back. I had to mount a legal battle. And in that process, people kept saying she must be from somewhere else. Listen to the sound of her name. Look at the color of her skin. And I unfortunately, I read the Twitter comments. Yeah, I didn't know any better. This was 5 years ago.
Right.
I didn't have that much going on. I guess I did. I had a newborn at home, funny enough. But everybody remembers newborn life. The child is sedentary. You're just literally feeding and having a good time. And, with this tiny little package. And I'm thinking to myself, I've got this new baby here. How fun. I'm going to get to go to the convention is a sort of like just a really fun experience this summer. It was going to kind of make me feel like I was myself again, aside from being a mom. And then when all that happened and I got death threats over email, and they'd found my phone number and voicemail, they'd even found my husband's WebMD profile. My husband's a physician in Northern Virginia. They found that, and they were trying to give him 1-star reviews. It upended my life in a way that I wish on nobody, not even my worst enemy. I lost a couple clients overnight. I, at that point, was writing for Republican members of the House. I had to turn those contracts into non-disclosure agreements, have those signed with folks, and turn those into sort of private, confidential agreements. I couldn't tell folks that I was working for these people because what I was saying publicly was not aligning with their brand. And that was a shame for me because I never thought I'd go from behind the scenes to the front of house. I've been involved with great organizations. I've been attending the programming of She Should Run and Vote Run Lead. Actually, by that time, I had already joined the advisory board of Vote Run Lead, which is a fantastic nonpartisan nonprofit organization, which I've been so honored to be a part of since its inception. I've been an advisory board member there. They came to my aid, and I had a lot of support from folks that knew that what I was doing was hard. But when I was living through it, it was my own personal hell, and I really shuddered to think of how long it took me to come out of that. Because people don't realize that when you're just a small person out there. Senator Rubio didn't send me any resources. No Republican picked up their phone to say this is happening to this young woman. I did, however, on Twitter have some very surprising names come to my aid in my DMs on Twitter. And those were pretty big either celebrity names, and some of them were even prominent, what would be considered establishment Republicans that had worked in the Bush era. And those people kept me going.
Hmm.
I was sort of an observer on Twitter. I'd been on there since 2009, 2010, but I hadn't really been active. And when that happened to me and I became the story, I got to see who was real. My party turned on me, and my party didn't want me to, they didn't want to have anything to do with me because what I'd done was politically inconvenient. So what's happening to Liz Cheney right now, I know exactly what she's going through. It's a very alone experience.
So I want to get back to Miss Cheney. I want to ask you a couple of questions, because this was when you ended up speaking against Trump. That was early on, but there were actually some prominent Republicans who were saying he's not the right person for our country. Look at him. I mean, this is something that we don't want to stand for the Republican Party. So I'm very surprised that you were targeted and subjected to the, I'll use the word hate, so
Sure.
early on, when there were so many other big names that were speaking the same language. So it's interesting that that was directed at you.
Those big names were largely older, and they were overwhelmingly white and male, and they had the resources to do whatever they wanted. They could speak out. They didn't have to lose anything. I was putting my delegate seat on the line because I didn't think my party would ever do what they did to me, and I was vindicated by an independent tribunal of RNC committeemen and committee women from across the country, because how they tried to negate me being a delegate was by saying that by purchasing a house in Virginia, I had invalidated my DC residency. And that couldn't have been further from the truth. I was not dishonest. In fact, by that standard, Donald Trump or Mitt Romney wouldn't be able to vote in the places they voted. They were punishing me for achieving the American dream of having a second home. And that was the shocking part. There was one even RNC committeeman who brought up, well, where is she nursing her baby?
Okay.
So that was shocking to me, is that they would go that far. He said, well, there's no way she has a house 12 miles outside of the district or 15 miles outside the district. Where is she sleeping at night? Where is she nursing her child? Funny thing is that I wasn't able to nurse my first child. I didn't have anything to give. And that was the hardest part, to have those kind of accusations lobbed at me while I was going through the toughest throes of motherhood, which is those early days and a first-time mom. So I don't want to say, did they do it because I'm this young brown woman? Yeah, maybe it was convenient, but the Washington Post called me the poster girl for the Never Trump movement, because my case really became the first. More delegates started to speak out against the country, and what the Trumpsters were afraid of, what Paul Manafort was afraid of, and why he tried to get rid of me, is because they were afraid of a delegate insurrection. I had said that if I was going to go to Cleveland, which I had every plan to when I was reinstated, and told that I was not doing anything wrong. And in fact, the independent tribunal told the local party that they were concerned at the standard that they were using. But here was the thing. I didn't get seated at the convention because the credentials committee was stacked with a bunch of pro-Trump Republicans. So they didn't want me or any other delegate that had spoken out on the floor, because we were planning Hamilton electors, free the delegates. We had a bunch of small groups going. We were planning to mount an insurrection. We were planning to, and as many remember, Ken Cuccinelli in Virginia shouted loudly from the floor of that convention. And so that's what the plan was. And I was the first person to do it. So that's why I think I was really taken out to pasture faster than anyone else. But I do think it's because it was easier to do to me. They did think it would be easier to do to me.
And I think even now that we're in 2021, like 5 years after your initial experience with that you're still seeing it. So now we're going to segue to the Cheney matter. Here is, you have somebody who, I don't know any evidence that suggests that the election was not fair and free.
Correct.
Right? So here you've got somebody who says, we have to acknowledge the fact that Biden is the new president. And the backlash that she's getting is, honestly, it's so surprising because of a number of things. One is, how do you call into question one part of the ballot, but you don't call into question the other 5 or 6 parts of the ballot, right? Because all ballots are pretty much downstream as well. So nobody votes just for the president, right? Or the ballot doesn't just include the election for the president. It has all of the down ballot names. So how can you suggest that one part of it is invalid, but the other parts where you've got all of these senators and congressmen and everybody coming to play, but you were willing to stay on the fact that those individuals won? Like, how do you get that inconsistent result without it making really no sense at all that this is that you could continue with that. And now we have Cheney, who is being upended because she is the lone voice, and she's probably one of the very few women who's on that part. And if you look at anybody else who's made some of those statements, why are they not targeted?
So she's the number 3 in House leadership. And that is the very thing here, is that she stepped out of line with the leadership, and she's doing what is to them very politically inconvenient. But how funny. And I was thinking about this through the frame of sexism. Is it sexist to have, you said, this woman can no longer serve with us? So I think about it, and I think on its face, they would have done this to a man if he stepped out of line with the leadership. I think so. But
you think so?
I think they would have. I think they would have done it to a man. I've seen it done to enough men, who, but not in this fashion, not in this way. There wouldn't be this severe punishment that they seem to want to inflict on her. So again, on its face is what I mean, is that I think she stepped out of line for them because it is the leadership. They need to sound unified. So it's like, hey, Liz, you're not speaking the team, you're not doing the team chant, excuse me, not speaking the leadership's language here. You're really getting off base here, and getting off base in what way? I mean, Kevin McCarthy, he's issued this letter, if I'm not mistaken, just the other day, to his colleagues saying, we welcome free and independent thought. Well, apparently not from the women who seem to want to do it. But again, I do tend to think that this is something that they would have done to anybody that continues to say, we need to move past Trumpism. He is no longer the president. The election was not rigged. It was valid. And we need to move on as a party. That's essentially what she's saying. And actually, why they don't want to embrace that stands to really be the bigger question. And Buddha, I got to tell you, it's more than the fact that this party does not, well, the biggest thing is this party is not embracing democracy, and what they're doing is so anti-democratic, how they are continuing to perpetuate the big lie. But the reality is that the party no longer stands for anything, absolutely nothing. They have no leg to stand on when it comes to the debts and deficits talks that many of us got when we were coming up. And we thought, this is a party that will, look, I'm socially somewhat liberal the older I've gotten, actually. And I've seen some things in my life. I'm a member of the Jain faith, which is more of a philosophy and a way of life, if you ask me, rather than a real solid religion. In my book, my personal philosophy is live and let live. But the thing is, when we look at this party and you think about what is it that they want to present to the American people that has anything to do with solutions to some of our biggest problems, they don't seem to want to embrace anything. Everything is a no, a heck no. And so that's the problem that I think is fundamentally most disappointing for folks like me who've come up in the party. We've done everything right. And look, maybe I'm a little bit of a bitter Betty here because I thought that I'd be working in a Republican administration one day instead of fighting one. And here I am, and I've had my entire career trajectory upended. So many of us go to the Hill. We think of it as something of, my husband's a physician, so all I can say is it's akin to a medical residency, bad hours, low pay, but all with the promises that you're getting this really great education. You're going to be valuable somewhere, and that somewhere is going to give you that payday that you deserve. And I had looked forward to that, and I never got it. And so, look, I caught the campaign bug, and I had a good time doing that. That was great. But the whole idea to go back and work for a Republican would have been great. And yeah, look, we don't have a President Romney. We had a President Trump, and now it's over. So I salute Liz Cheney for putting country over party. It's something I've been doing time and time again. I even did it when I voted for Biden in Virginia. I felt it was necessary. I felt the country needed it. Is he a perfect man? Absolutely not. But no leader is that perfect. So you vote for, unfortunately, the lesser of the two evils. And in my opinion, Biden was not evil. He was somebody that was going to unify the country with his leadership style and the vision that he would bring from years in public service and a heart that had withstood a lot of adversity and stands smiling day in and day out.
I think one of my biggest disappointments in watching the I'll just call it the Trump takeover, was because we're from New York. we knew what his background was. When you talk about a businessman, he bankrupted, his companies, wouldn't pay people. So he was a deadbeat. He was somebody who was a bully on all fronts. And when he was running, he told us, right? He's sexist, he's racist, all of these things. He didn't hide anything. So you start thinking like, well, who the heck would vote for him? And then we see with the Republican Party where those who ran against him would call him out. These are the deficits he has. This is not the person we want to not only lead the Republican Party, we don't want him to lead our nation. Then he gets elected and it's like all morals somehow got buried. All anti anything that was wrong just got shut down. I mean, you think about the individuals who were in Congress who they know better. When he was dividing our country, nobody rose up to say, wait a second, let me have a private conversation with you, sir. This is not good. But it's almost like nobody tried to center him or to try to bring him back from that edge. I didn't see any of that, which was very disheartening because that's what I think one of the positive takeaways that I've always had from our election system and our political parties. Yes, we only two, but it was always a balance. Like even within your own party, you couldn't go too extreme because people would bring you back and be like, whoa, we got to deal with this now because it's always about unifying the United States. And here I didn't see it. And the silence to me was deafening. And I'm thinking, how could you sit there and do that? And for a lot of those who are elected, you have kids. How do you account to your kids that you allowed our nation to get to this point? How did you do that? And that was part of it was very disheartening for me, where you sit there and you're just like, I just don't know how to deal with it. And I will tell you this, for 4.5 years, I was traumatized watching the news.
Oh yeah.
I couldn't sleep at night. I would watch things and it would be that compulsive, watching hour after hour after hour, talking about the same issue. And then switching from CNN and going to Fox and switching over to MSNBC and going over to OAN and just trying to see, it's like, what should I be thinking? Because this is it just couldn't be our reality.
So, I can relate completely. Yeah, I felt the same way.
Yeah, so that was very disheartening. So now I'm gonna go back now to your function as your role within where you are right now with being a mom of a 5 and 2-year-old. Because you did a lot of this before your now 5-year-old was really old enough to benefit from it. Do you feel like you have a sense of obligation or duty to your daughters and the daughters of our future to be able to say, I needed to say something, I have to still say something, because it's not just us, right? And you've got a decade or more younger than I am. It's not the us factor, but it's the next generation. Like, how do we make this better for them? Do you feel that bit of responsibility?
I wish I could say I did completely, but when you're going through these kind of things, you're just it's minute by minute, and you do get selfish in politics, and I put myself ahead of anybody else when I realized I had to fight. I was really concerned about my reputation, that I was being branded as a liar. And so the fire really came from my years of having put in work. And so, yeah, there is a bit of that there that I think my daughter should not have to go through what I did, where I was on Capitol Hill working for members of Congress that I know didn't see the same promise for me that they saw for other kids, kids of their wealthy donors or kids who came from a certain background, whether it was racially or even economically. There were times where I felt resentment from folks who knew my father had come here and achieved the American dream. And they were 2-3 generations away from somebody who had immigrated there and their family, and they weren't doing as well as my family was. Well, what folks don't realize. Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. Do you feel like part of that resentment came from a feeling like something was being taken away from them?
Yeah, a bit of, I'm sure it had to have. I know that was a lot of it as well. Okay, how's your oh, you guys have this kind of house, or you guys have that kind of vehicle. And it's like, we weren't living some kind of high roller lifestyle. We just had some nice things, which is what somebody gets to have when they do well later in their life. My parents got the great dream of being able to build their own home at the end of my father's life. He just passed 3 years ago, but that was the biggest pleasure for him after his family had lost everything in Uganda, everything they'd built over three generations. And in one lifetime, he could build this home. It gives me goosebumps. And he was a polio survivor. He
Wow.
operated for 8 to 10 hours at a time on essentially one leg. The other one wore a brace, and it was on a built up shoe. And I remember thinking, these people don't know. Everything in the world is not black and white, and it is gray. And if more people knew my family story, they would say, how amazing that your dad would love America so much when he learned about it as a young boy in East Africa and decided, I want to go there one day, because he knew this was a land where people looked at people equally, or there was at least this guiding document, the Constitution, that had these values enshrined in them. And so, yeah, we weren't an imperfect nation, but we were more of a concept. And he liked that concept. And it was always on his mind to be here. And he got himself here with his own hard work after the family had lost everything. He put it all on the line. And that is why my siblings and I were so blessed to live the life we did, because of the tremendous sacrifices my parents made. But to get to a point where other people just on their face said, oh, well, gee, how do y'all have that? Yeah, well,
Right.
hi. It's called hard work, and it's called achieving the American dream. So can we applaud it instead of looking at people and thinking, well, my family should be doing that? No, it's everybody's life is different. It's the dream and the reality that somebody could come here with nothing, or be born with nothing, and have a completely separate and different future than one had ever thought was intended for them, because they did it with their own two hands. And they brought themselves up. And that was the kind of opportunity I thought this Republican Party wanted to talk about. Economic opportunity, just talking about things in a different way for Americans, presenting a different side of the coin. That's it. Where did this hatred come from? This absolute hatred for our fellow man, for our neighbors. This party has lost its soul. It's lost its soul.
The way that I have kind of reconciled it is this: that there's a lot being done by individuals who are in a position of power that
Indeed.
they are benefiting from, that they shouldn't. So if I could change your focus as to who you think is the person who's taken away from you, and I could pit you with somebody else, is that old divide and conquer, right? So then the two of you and somebody else are the ones who are battling over what? We don't know. But then you're not looking at me, the person who's really benefiting the most. Because if you think about what just within the pandemic period, right? March of 2020, we had millions and millions of jobs lost. We had millions and millions of jobs lost by women, millions and millions of jobs lost by people who were making $7, $8, $9, $10 an hour, right? And these are also the individuals who may not have the benefit of being able to invest in our stock market. And we look at the stock market, it took a dive of 30 or 40%. Like, oh my gosh, right? You know, this would be within a year, it doubles and then some. So we have those individuals who are the billionaires and higher. Yeah, their life financially improved during that 1 year. The majority of our people, they can't, kind of scrub. They can't like rub two nickels together to be able to pay a bill, right? And we sit here when we start looking at any of the financial assistance that Congress can make, we're going to begrudgingly say, well, they shouldn't be entitled to that because it's going to make them lazy or not want to work. Really? Because all that PPP money went to people who didn't need it. Absolutely. Right? So you didn't raise those that need it. You didn't invest in our community. You invested on those who could afford to continue without your assistance. So these are things that you look at from a fiscally conservative perspective. Sure. And it's it becomes the Republicans, it becomes the Democrats. Like, let's sit down and start talking common sense. Right?
Where are the pragmatists?
Because the point becomes this: if I can put you in a situation where you're successful, I don't have to carry you. If I keep depressing you with your $7.25 hour, $1 an hour job, I have to pay more of my taxes. I have to pay more for the streets, more for the schools, because you can't contribute as much. So if I give you a living wage or something that you can do better, then guess what? You're going to contribute more to that tax base. So we just have to figure out is how can we be fiscally conservative across the board, but we do have to be inclusive because this country was built on the back of people who came here or who lived here, didn't look like the white male.
That's right.
You know, they benefited from it, but and I don't have a problem if you benefit from somebody else's work, but don't break them when it's time now to accrue the return on the investment. Right? You have to include them.
Well,
right? You have to include them. They put in the sweat equity.
You sure do.
That's the part
actually the
frustration.
American. Yeah, that's the American way. And I get your frustration because that's the American way to do things that way. We should lift others as we rise. And that's the thing. I'm so blessed to be able to do this work, but I stand on the shoulders of really amazing ancestors. I'm here because of the sacrifices my immigrant parents put in. And I am absolutely privileged to be able to be an entrepreneur because it was them who said, take the risk. Yeah. You'll have our moral support. And guess what? If you need the financial, we will give you what we have. And I said, no, I want to do it myself. I want to, because you guys did all of it yourself. And my job is to do better than you did. And I still think I have a long ways to go, but to be able to sit in Washington, D.C. and the area and to be able to advise international corporations on legislative strategy or what they want to know about the American political landscape, it's a privilege and it's an honor. And it's the kind of work that folks think, you know, you're just a cog, you're just somebody who's a part of this wheel that keeps spinning. And no, we can do things in Washington that's different. You can be a reformer and a change maker while continuing to be a part of the system in a way and make a living and do things that are honest. Yeah, look, I'm not a lobbyist. I've never done that. I'm a public affairs and strategic communications consultant. I have a political intelligence agency, and I enjoy this work because I have always loved politics. It's always been my first love: politics, government, public policy making. I get to do this work and make it my living, but I don't forget that with this comes great responsibility to shine a light on others, to amplify the voices of those who need it. The reform, it's going to come, right, but it's going to come from those who felt pain. Women, minorities, and the working class. And that's the reality today's Republican Party needs to wake up to. You can't have every woman be a Congresswoman Elise Stefanik of New York State, who comes to Congress as one version and now is a completely different version of herself, and spent a year, particularly that first impeachment trial of Trump, auditioning to be a member of a Trumpy party, to be a leader of a very Trumplican version of the party. And so she'll get her day in the sun, but at what cost? Her personal integrity, her character, and all of those things will matter again to people. Right now, we are in a moment. I mean, I guess I can't work in politics as long, and I couldn't have done so as long as I have without being an eternal optimist. I really do think the pendulum will swing back. People will be so fed up of what version of pure malarkey this party keeps serving its members. They've let its most fringe and fanatical element hijack it completely, to the point where we see it all. We almost saw it in Virginia. Right. were it not for ranked choice voting.
Well, that's what we're going to end up talking about. So here you've got a situation where if somebody is looking at the way the politics are, either on a local level or a national level, right? And they're trying to figure out like how do we get here? From a national level, I think we are familiar with kind of like how people end up getting on a ballot. And as you mentioned Virginia. In Virginia, we have an election right now that is from the full Commonwealth level. We have the governor, lieutenant governor, we have the attorney general. And of recent experience, people saw that there was a different process for the two different parties. Can you share a little bit as to what exactly took place for the process to take place, so that there was a person that to date has been designated for the Republican Party, however, is going to be designated, and for the Democrats, it's more of a June process. So that's going to happen a little bit later.
Choice voting is something I've been talking about for a while with many Republicans, and it's it's because it actually does help more women and minorities get elected. I am very proud to be on the board of directors of Represent Women. We're an organization that originally started out of Fair Vote. I encourage listeners to go check out the incredible work of Fair Vote. They've been advocating for plain old ranked choice voting for a long time now. And I'll tell you, it was really incredible that they were able to get that adopted. In many places around the country, Utah embraced ranked choice voting for 2021 elections, and it's incredible. I spent some time out in Utah in 2016, and really love Utahns and the way they think about things. And I actually did meet some Utah lawmakers a couple of years ago that talked to me about how it actually lowers the cost. I met some municipal city level folks who said it actually costs less for us to put on elections if we use ranked choice voting. And so, look, conservatives don't really embrace election reforms haphazardly. A while ago, there was not an appetite for it. When I started talking about ranked choice voting to some of my conservative friends across states and whatnot, I said, this is about good governance. It needs to start locally. Ranked choice voting is a reform that we ought to, we ought to see adopted in more places around the country, because also not just do more women and minorities get elected in ranked choice voting, it creates an environment in which there's less negative campaigning as well. And just the fact that voters really, by virtue of being able to rank who they'd like to see in office, will get their voice heard. And so that would hopefully energize more people to turn out. As you know, before the 2021 election, we had huge issues with millennial turnout. I think some 60% of non-voters prior to the 2021 election were millennials between the ages of 26 and 38. And that was just the craziest part to me, is that how could it be? So in Virginia, the Republican Party successfully used RCV to elect a nominee for governor. So there were 6 rounds, and Glenn Youngkin has become the Republican nominee for governor, and he beat out Pete Snyder with 55% of the vote. So Youngkin took an early 7-point lead, and that pretty much expanded gradually throughout the rounds of tabulation. And he earned, and so what I would say is that notably, here, what I was most happy about was Amanda Chase, who is a very Trumpy candidate, a very, very scary Trumpy candidate. Just Google search her. Amanda Chase, Virginia, not a good look, this woman. She'd head out into the street with a gun. She's that bold and brazen. She was a 3rd place finisher. And she was actually, this is what was sad about it, and this is how she chose to campaign. She encouraged her supporters not to rank other candidates. So I have a stat for you here that I've learned through Fair Vote, and I want to thank the folks over at Fair Vote for sharing these numbers with the public. Rob Ritchie especially, and Cynthia Terrell Ritchie, they are doing incredible work. But they said 74% of Amanda Chase's supporters ranked at least one of the 2 finalists and had their ballots count towards the final round. So fully 99.9% of delegate casts valid gubernatorial votes. And that was really substantial. It was a substantial victory for anybody who wants fairer outcomes from our elections. I am really glad the Virginia GOP did this, because I actually think, though I'm not a big fan of Glenn Youngkin, I've not sat down with him and met him yet. I've had a chance to, I've chosen not to yet. I wanted to see how he did. He was somebody who is not as Trumpy as obviously Amanda Chase or Pete Snyder. My choice in this race would have been Kurt Cox. But look, I think in Glenn Youngkin, you've got somebody that didn't fully embrace Trump, but didn't rebuke him either. He didn't issue a rebuke of Trump. And so you got somebody that's not the scariest candidate. I know I threw a mouthful at you with that, but I really want people to know ranked choice voting works, and this is all about good governance, and we should all want that. We should all want that.
So do you know why this particular election period, the GOP elected to run it this way?
I wish I had some insight on that. I actually don't have much background on that. I know that there has been an effort, and I've been a part of a few confabs recently, in which prominent conservatives have really echoed their support for this electoral reform. Out of all the ones that are proposed by great organizations like Represent Us, that talk about, ending gerrymandering, ending big money in politics. And I think I've remained a change agent in the Republican Party, largely because of what I started to see in 2016 and 2017, especially 2018, is I would continue to have conversations with those who still affiliated with the Republican Party, some who'd even voted for Trump, many who'd voted for Trump, and I'd hear them out. And a lot of them did share attitudes on ending gerrymandering. Some of them even were supportive of overturning Citizens United. So I don't mean to be ageist here, but younger conservatives have sort of encouraged me that maybe there's a brighter future for the party. So in a couple of weeks ago, I did hear from former governor of Virginia, George Allen. And he was very supportive of ranked choice voting and had established a good relationship with a Utah gentleman who was the chair of the Republican Party in Utah. His name was Mr. Stan Lockhart. He and Governor Allen had been in close touch. And I think that the appetite for RCV emerged through those kind of conversations. Prominent state level Republicans saying, hey, we got to do something. And this is a good way to do it.
So now, earlier you said that ranked choice voting also inures to the benefit of minorities and women. What is the connection on that?
Well, the idea is at least that more women are turned off to negative campaigning. And that's the part that, we get real dicey with when we want to go and ask a woman to run. She says, no, politics isn't for me. And I always say, well, politics may be the way I make a living and have for many years, but it's also something that's not like a sport. It's not something you choose to watch. It's something that you have to be involved in some way and pay attention to, because it impacts your daily life and my daily life the minute you walk outside the house. And the minute that most women become mothers, I think they start to see really what's going right and wrong in their communities, because it impacts this new life. And that's the thing about having children, and even for those who are childless by choice or do not have children, this is the reality, is that there are things as we go on in life that we realize the government is doing poorly for us. And maybe if we raised our voice, we could create that change. But the negative campaigning of the past many years and the amount of money it's taken to be able to mount a campaign, RCV sort of cuts down on all that. And levels the playing field in that way by allowing folks who sort of say, look, let me be a part of a slate or get with somebody and build a bit of a coalition. That is more comfortable, more palatable, and one of the ways in which I understand RCV works. I don't know if I'm perfectly correct on that, but my understanding is the negative campaigning portion is really taken out when voters are able to really rank who they want. So your second and third choices, there's a way it all works out in the tabulations, which does come out in the favor of women and minorities who traditionally do stay away.
Now, it was interesting because it wasn't until late in the process that the Republicans announced that there was going to be the RCV. Because initially it was going to be either the firehouse, or it was going to be, the traditional way. And when this came out, it was interesting because you had a lot of people asking, what exactly does that mean? So I don't even know how well they marketed it for people to appreciate and understand how that process was going to play itself out.
That's a really good question, because I actually don't think they did much, because this is the thing about a lot of your older school conservatives who are out in the rural areas and would have been all for Trump. Many of them, they don't want any changes, right? They are already, this past election cycle made them already skeptical of a lot of how voting works in this country, because they were sold a bill of goods. They were told daily that your vote cast was maybe not even counted. And the system is rigged, and there are fraudulent votes across the country. You and I know there's no empirical evidence of widespread voter fraud. Ben Ginsburg, the famous Republican lawyer of many years, has said, on the whole, for years and years, we've never seen widespread voter fraud. And the Heritage Foundation, the very conservative think tank based in Washington, D.C., they keep a database of only some 1,300 cases of erroneous sort of reports from municipalities or counties of voting error and mistakes, fraud, what have you. This is the reality, though, is that for ranked choice voting to have a strong base of support and broader appeal across the party, it's going to take time. And that's why I think they didn't market it right away. They sort of said, let's see how this goes over. It would have taken a long time to do the education piece as well. So in a way, I think what was sort of taken into account by the Virginia GOP is that maybe they just show up and they get this sheet where it sort of says rank your choices, and they'll do it because they've showed up at this virtual convention. They had a number of sites across the state where folks could drive up and do so. So this is the reality, is that it is an election reform, but one that is going to take time with conservatives around the country. And unfortunately, this is just the era we live in with today's Republican. They are not feeling like most electoral reforms can be palatable for them because of the way in which they're messaged to them. So I, for one, am going to do my part to make sure more Republicans across the country, even back in my home state of West Virginia, will understand that this is not complicated. This is not doing anything but giving your voice the opportunity to really be heard.
What will it take for the Republican Party to invite you back or make you feel confident that that party represents you?
On a local level in Virginia, I'd say I hope Glenn Youngkin chooses to speak out against what is the big lie, what we know of it on a federal level. As he's going to be, if he wants to be the governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, he needs to step up instead of going and pandering for votes. He needs to stand for something. I right now see in Glenn Youngkin, from what I've witnessed on social media of him, a guy who just feels like he says and thinks maybe even, or feels like he can maybe even go out and say there are good people on both sides. That's what I'm worried about. That is not what I want. To be feeling like I belong in this party again, I want, frankly, activists like Liz Cheney. I want activist legislators and lawmakers who say, we're going to stand up for truth. We're going to look at the facts. We're going to point to those facts, and whatever we do will be from a place that's rooted in truth and science. And so that's hard. It's really hard. Because I don't see any indication that's going to happen. In fact, what I'm seeing is that this guy, Glenn Youngkin, really, is out of touch likely with many folks who have real concerns that impact working class folks. So what he's going to go try and do is say, I was the CEO of the successful organization. I'm going to use that same litmus to be this incredible CEO of this state. I don't think that's fully a winning argument to get people like me back in the tent. It's going to have to be an approach that is unconventional and unlike one that anyone's likely had to take, because we are living in unconventional times.
How will you view his silence on those issues? If he doesn't speak to it either way, one, he doesn't speak in support of or anti-Trump, how will you take that type of balance in his presentations?
Silence is the kind of thing where, I'm not acquainted with silence. I've always been loud. I've always expressed whatever's on my mind. So when I look back and think of the times that many have stayed silent while horrible things have been happening, and what does that silence really means? It means they're okay with that. They're okay with whatever is happening, as long as it doesn't come to their doorstep. And when it comes to their doorstep, they might say something that is just not acceptable. Like, there are good people on both sides, fine people on both sides. It's not going to work. So his silence will also work against him when he's looking to perhaps create that big tent here and bring in folks in the northern part of the state who matter, who previously may have voted Republican, or who actually may even be wanting to vote against some Democrats because they feel that maybe what they're doing is not serving them. Look, there's really at this moment, Peter, where I have also felt some concern about some things the Biden administration is doing. I'm very supportive of the administration in many ways, but I am concerned about a couple of things. And one of them being in how President Biden does seem to want to redefine the role of government as we know it. And look, that can be debated. We can have a healthy debate about what that means in these times. But right now, there's nobody making sensical arguments. Nobody even wants to come to the table as an honest broker for the potential policy solutions we could have, because the arguments and the conversations and the discussion on the whole has gone so off the rails. That's what I worry about in a guy like Glenn Youngkin, who doesn't seem to stand for much. Again, my mind could be changed over the course of many weeks. I may meet him and decide otherwise, but right now it's not looking great. For him or the Republicans. How do you build the broad coalition? You don't do it by staying lukewarm.
Nope, and I think you're exactly right, because, first of all, I am a huge fan of Hamilton, but it is, you go back to that statement, like, if if you don't know, you're not going to express what you stand for, then, what will you fall? You're going to fall on everything, right? Because then it's easy for somebody to topple you, because you haven't stood tall, you haven't stood strong on being able to say, this is what I'm going to commit to. Playing the gray, one, I think it's also misleading, right? Because you haven't told people what you are about. So somebody then can pick you, but then when you start showing what you really are about, then it's a sale of a bad bag of goods, because they didn't know what was inside. And now when you open it up, you're like, wait, I would not have selected that person. So we need people to use their voices. We need people to speak up when we do see those inequities, and just that again is America, right? I don't fight for me first. I fight for you first, right? And then when the time comes, then we fight for me, right? Because that's the only way that we as a nation strive for excellence, and that's also how we grow towards excellence. And we haven't seen that in a long time, and that's the disheartening part, where you saw people who saw it and didn't say anything. I'm going to just take 2 more minutes. You have a couple more minutes?
Sure. I'd love to hang.
Because I want to talk a little bit also about kind of like the January 6th event.
Sure.
And that was very disheartening, because we all saw it. And I don't know about what anybody else's perception was, but I felt like almost like similar to 9/11, I lost some more of my innocence. Like, how would we ever attack our own Capitol? Like, how would that thought form in somebody's mind? And then how would somebody do it? And then how would we endorse it, either as a president or some other strong political figure who we voted you into office to keep us safe? So that to me was just, kind of from a global perspective, very disheartening. So I don't know, did that impact you in any particular way? Because you worked there. I mean, I've visited it, right? But I've never had an office there. I've not, known the people walking down the hallway to say, hey, Bobby, and hey, Mary. I didn't know that. I mean, I was just a guest. But did that have a particular impact upon you? Because that was your home for a while.
It was. And I remember it always felt like home when I started working there. I thought, how incredible is it to be here walking these halls that great men and women have walked. And I hope more women walk in due time. Actually, tomorrow. I really wish that would be a thing, that we would have more women elected to all levels of U.S. government, that would be more representative of what this country looks like. Unfortunately, we don't have that. We don't have enough women at all levels of U.S. government. But in walking those halls and looking around and realizing I'm doing the people's work here, I'm somebody who's just a part of this big place. But when I sat on January 6th as a political commentator for Al Jazeera Media Network, on the roof of 101 Constitution Avenue, which is the closest private building to the Capitol grounds, and face the west front of the Capitol, which is where the rally turned insurrection, turned siege of the Capitol took place. I cannot believe it, that it was my fortune to sit there for 5 hours, didn't have a chance to go to the bathroom, no water, no food. We were all shocked. We thought we were covering a very momentous day, of course, the counting, the affirmation of the votes that had come in from the states. We thought it was sort of procedural, but hey, there'll be some, little bit of commotion, there'll be some tension, but nothing physical. thought, this is all words. That's what you think you're dealing in here. When it turned into the physical of what I witnessed through the windows of that rooftop, I had goosebumps. Driving there earlier that day, mid-morning towards lunchtime, I had witnessed Proud Boys, what I knew to be Proud Boys for the hate group, walking the streets. Of course, they were walking silently, but they were wearing their fatigues and carrying their flags. And I remember thinking, okay, a bunch of roads are closed. That's standard in DC. You're diverting traffic because, you know, there's going to be assembly. I get to the roof, and within 20 minutes of me sitting down, I have this all captured on my phone. The crowds did turn violent. But when I looked out at the sea of people going from the west front of the Capitol towards the Museum of Native American History, you know, to the reflecting pool, they stretch out that far. They were carrying Trump flags. It was a sea of largely white folks. So a part of me did see that right away. And I couldn't believe that was something I was feeling immediately. That was my first takeaway, because I'd seen the Proud Boys not long before. So I thought, is this a white supremacy rally? That's what struck me. I thought that I just didn't see many shades. And I worried about what my situation would be when I would get down from the building. And I was able to get home safely, cross over to Virginia, and all was fine. I went through the Ninth Street Tunnel. Everything was okay, fortunately. But the sheer magnitude of that imagery, when mobs of people made it up the walls. As a former congressional staffer, I know that never happens. How in the world? I knew Capitol Police was overwhelmed, and when they made it through the sort of sieve, the cleavage between the Senate side and the building that houses the Capitol, I knew then that wow, this is a terror attack. And I fully expected something to come down from the sky, because all I heard for 4 to 5 hours was, until I got out of there, was nothing but the sound of fireworks, muskets sounding like they were going off, tear gas canisters, being able to see those fumes. It was wild. I saw a huge American flag unfurled on one side of the bleachers that were assembled for inauguration. It was wild. And I think it's taken me a long time to recover from it. I wanted to describe it like that for the listeners, because it was such a moment for me in which I was scared senseless. I went into sort of just self-preservation mode. I have some trauma from that. It is something that I wish nobody has to go through, that kind of moment where they fear for their own personal safety because of the color of their skin. I genuinely felt that. I was one of only 2 people of color on that roof. And I thought, if this guy and I go downstairs, what's our situation going to be? Are they going to come for us? Because it was a mob out there. It was as bad as the news reported, if not worse. And now we know the images, and now we've seen what we've seen. And it's a darn shame that there is not a commission been established, a bipartisan commission, to investigate what happened on January 6th. We are over 4 months out, and Republicans do not want the truth to come out. And that is why we're being failed as a country by our own elected lawmakers.
For starters, I am sorry that you went through that experience, because I can only imagine how horrific it was. One from a safety and self-preservation perspective, and another one from really a holistic approach, just seeing all of the expectations and your thoughts just kind of just being shattered. Like, as I said earlier, like, how does this happen in our country? Like, how does this happen in 2021? And for starters, I do not wish for anybody to ever get harmed or killed.
Sure.
And you sit there and you're like, well, how does this play itself out? Like, how do we come back from this?
Right.
And I don't know if we will. Because as you said, there hasn't been a study, there hasn't been a full investigation. Yes, we have people who've been prosecuted from their actions. But how did we come to that date and that point in time and that type of collaboration? There's a lot of story to be told there.
There's a big story.
There.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. You said it perfectly. I couldn't have said it better myself. In that, what is the larger story? We haven't even been told yet.
No,
fully.
I know. But I want to thank you for your time, because you've been so gracious. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you sharing your experiences. I am hopeful as a country that what will happen is that these are just, again, growing pains, and we will come back to being much more centrist in what's going on, because we don't win anything by being extreme, but we are truly a nation that is made better and stronger because we come together. If we start looking at one another as to seeing how different we are or how less worthy we are, honestly, we're not as successful. So I'm going to let you have your closing comments if you wish to make any. And I do, again, appreciate you having taken your time. And I wish you the greatest of blessings to you and your family.
Oh, thank you so much. The same goes to you and your family during these particularly unusual times that persist. But fortunately, we have science now on our side, and hopefully we'll all resume getting back to normal so as soon as possible. And I would love to meet you in person. This was such a pleasure to have this conversation with you virtually. I'm just excited to see what happens over the many months while we sort of resume regular normal activity. Are we going to take this moment as a country to do better for ourselves as we realize how difficult this past year and how great these losses of our fellow Americans has been? There are people out there who are suffering in ways that we cannot comprehend. Just in my extended family, we had our 5th death this past weekend in India. My extended family on my husband's side, on my side, we have had loss. And I know so many of our fellow Americans are dealing with that right here in the Commonwealth, as well as across this country. And we need to do better for each other. So I'm here to do that. And in that vein, I have most recently just joined the advisory board of Renew Democracy Initiative. I am proud to be a pro-democracy advocate and fighter. I am very, very concerned about the health of our republic. And I think there are some great efforts we can all make. So I encourage folks to check out Renew Democracy Initiative. I'm very honored to have been asked to join the board of advisors there. We are doing incredible work to hopefully promote these wonderful ideals of democracy, not just here, but around the world. And so I hope folks will check us out and find me on Twitter. Anybody who wants to chat, I'm open to it. Send me a note, a Twitter DM. I'm at Rina in DC, even though Rina is now in Virginia most days. She hopes to get back to DC in due time. But I do love my life here in Virginia, and I'm so honored to have been invited to be with you. You are doing incredible work, and my hat goes off to you. And thank you for all the work you do for our fellow citizens here in Virginia.
Well, thank you very much, Rina Shah, and we do appreciate you. And as long as you're keeping the faith, we are going to keep the faith. Thank you to our viewers. We appreciate you very much by joining us, and we know that we are here for you. If we can raise your voice, that is the purpose of our show. Again, thank you to Rina Shah for allowing us to take about an hour plus of her time, and for her being able to share her experience with us. Lastly, we do have an election yet again in Virginia. Please be engaged. How you vote, that is your choice, but please vote. Till next Saturday, have a great week, and God bless you.